Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, How Security and Compliance Can Save You and Your Clients. My name is Carrie Shania. I'm going to be your moderator today. We're going to discuss quite a few different topics today, everything from cybersecurity to disaster recovery, business preparedness, and of course, what's going on in everyone's mind right now, just preparing for, pandemic and developing an incident response plan to everything that's happening with the world right now. Our goal here today is just to give you some tips and some ideas and some resources that you can use when it comes to developing your own business continuity and security strategies. So just a couple of quick administrative things here before we get started. If you're having trouble viewing the slides or if you're having trouble hearing the presentation, please raise your hand or ask a question and I can help you troubleshoot there. Please note too, we're also going to have a specific Q&A session at the end of the webinar, so please feel free to send your questions to me at any time and I will make sure that we cover them before the end of the presentation. And now, without further ado, let's just jump right in and get started. I'd like to introduce our speaker, Jason Duchnowski, Product Manager here at OTAVA. Welcome, Jason.
Thanks, Carrie. Appreciate the introduction. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where in the world you are. For everything that's happening, hope you and those special people in your life are healthy and safe and you're able to make the best in light of the situation. With that said, welcome to the webinar. My name is Jason Duchnowski, as Carrie said, and I'm a product manager at OTAVA. Just for introduction's sake, I have a little bit about me. I have over 15 years of experience in enterprise infrastructure solutions, companies like EMC, Dell, Worldwide Technology, and Actifio. I recently transitioned from my role at OTAVA from the leader of global channels to the product management lead for data resiliency, business continuity, and disaster recovery, as well as some special projects. This webinar is really intended to provide you with information about today's security threat landscape, strategies to prevent a data breach, how to decrease the financial impact of a breach, how to protect your company in the event that you may experience a breach. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Carrie, if we can go to the next slide, please. Before we begin, I'd like to share a little bit about OTAVA. We are backed by a company called Schurz Communication. It's a 5th generation privately held company. OTAVA is rapidly becoming a well-known entity in the industry. As you can see from the badges of honor there on the slide. The company really originated as a regional Midwest service provider going by the name of Online Tech, providing services from 7 data centers across Indiana and Michigan. In 2018, 2 acquisitions doubled the size of the company. It expanded our points of presence across 3 continents and launched us fully into the channel. A rebrand shortly occurred after that in early 2019, and OTAVA was born. Next slide. OTAVA is a security and compliance-led provider. It's truly ingrained in our DNA. We became the first U.S. data center to sign a business associate agreement and assume responsibility for HIPAA. We're very proud of that. Relative to our compliance, unlike other providers, OTAVA is not internally audited to provide additional credibility and peace of mind to our clients. We're third-party audited by 2 firms, UHY and TCT, for HIPAA, Privacy Shield, SOC 1, 2, 3, ISO 27001, HIPAA, and HITRUST, all the little badges there along the bottom. And our audits incorporate both physical locations, physical data center space, and our full cloud services portfolio. As you can see up in the top right corner, a number of different services from cloud to co-location, data protection, security, and professional services. Next slide, please. To maintain high levels of security for our clients and for our compliance adherence, we provide various security services across our cloud portfolio. As you can see just from the slide there, there's a number of different things that we do, including daily log review, patch management, file integrity monitoring, antivirus, WAF, vulnerability scanning, so on and so forth. Touching again, Carrie, sorry, next slide. Touching again on the fact that we are a global company. Each of the points of presence is marked there by an orange marker. And again, we have a number of data centers across the US, from Las Vegas down in Texas, across Kansas City, Indiana, Michigan, and Virginia, and then international locations in UK and Australia. Truly a global provider. From a threat perspective, really why we're all here. If we look at some quick statistics, and I have a few slides that are just touching on from a stat perspective. When we're talking about global security threats, despite the explosion of really new security technologies at our disposal, and they're popping up everywhere, lots in Southern California, attempted and successful data breaches are growing at a continually accelerated rate. And really the United States, which I would suspect that a lot of us are based here in the US, like myself, the US is actually the most breached country in the world. Next slide, please. I want to talk about some more statistics. On the left, if you look at kind of global averages of disclosed breaches, these are data breaches. Really the average number of records exposed in a breach is roughly 25,000, and an average cost per record of $150 per record. If you look at what the total average cost is for a data breach, when you multiply the number of records by the cost per record, that comes to roughly $4 million. If we talk about the average total breach cost, more shockingly is the amount of time to identify and contain a breach. That 279 days, that's just over 9 months. It's a pretty extended period of time. And historically, that number is actually growing. So it's taking longer for companies to identify and contain a breach. The time when a breach occurs until the time that the breach is contained is known as the breach life cycle. Life cycle time is really critical when we're discussing costs of a breach. The industry with the highest breach cost is the healthcare industry, and they actually have the longest breach life cycle time. So if you look at the correlation between life cycle time and the cost of a breach, they're directly correlated. And interestingly enough, healthcare is actually the highest enforcement if we're looking at verticals when it comes to consumer protection. On the right, we're looking specifically at the United States. Notice there's actually a drastic increase in breach costs between the top number, which is the 2006 number of 3.54 million, to the 2019 number for the average cost of a breach is actually just over 8 million. And just as a point of reference, the next closest average cost for a breach, if we're looking comparing countries, is actually less than 6 million. So we're more than 2 million more than any other country. We're talking cost of breach. Next slide. It's really crucial to understand what the factors are that can increase or decrease the total cost of a breach. These statistics that you're seeing here and the ones from a couple of the previous slides come from an annual study that's performed by a research company called the Ponemon Institute. It's a study that's conducted in conjunction with IBM Security. Really, Ponemon is a leader of research when it comes to privacy and information security. This is the 14th year that they've done this particular study, and they do in-depth interviews with over 500 companies across the globe. Excuse me. If you want to interpret this chart, there's kind of the dark blue bars at the top. Those are all strategies to mitigate the cost of a data breach. We're looking at the total cost of a breach. These are things that can lower that cost. At the bottom is in the light blue, those are all factors that increase the total cost of a breach. There's a lot of different data points here. I'm going to actually go into more detail, with a lot of these. Interestingly enough, the highest amplifier is a third-party breach, and And I'd like to point out as well, in the middle of the mitigators, so that dark blue, there is AI and security analytics. These are really newer measures that companies can use. If applied properly, they can help lower the overall cost of breach. This is really the second year that the study has incorporated these factors in. So we'll talk a little bit more about how we can apply security technologies. Future slide. At the end of the day, resources are finite. We really have to build strategies that make the best use of money, resources, and time. So we're going to discuss a couple concepts that incorporate strategies to reduce the overall cost of breaches, prevent data breaches, and protect your business. The primary way to reduce the cost of a breach is to reduce the time from breach to containment. That's that concept I was mentioning earlier that was called the life cycle. The global trend is that life cycle is lengthening, again, as I mentioned, thus increasing a cost. So if a company is able to keep that breach life cycle down, actually statistically, if you can keep it below 200 days, on average, your breach costs will be 25% less than breaches that last more than 200 days. That's just a global average. Again, we're going to talk about methods to reduce that breach life cycle time, including incident preparedness and security technologies. The ideal scenario, obviously, is to prevent a breach. A fourth of breaches are caused by human error, so training staff becomes really a necessary part of any security posture. A cybersecurity risk analysis is intended to provide really a measurable way of measuring cyber risk with numerical results that can help you make comparisons, such as, is my risk profile better or worse than last year? Also helps you understand financial impact to the business of particular risks. So in general, it is generally kind of based on the combination of likelihood of occurrence versus the impact level. And with a proper analysis, you can determine where your largest areas of risks are and apply resources in those areas to help with prevention. In addition to the breach lifecycle, reducing that, it's no surprise security solutions can help with breach prevention. We're going to talk more about that later. And then also to protect your business after mortgage is paid, the next check should be written to insurance. I'm going to provide some do's and don'ts when it comes to the topic of cyber insurance. And then finally, a vendor assessment program. It's really an effective way to help reduce the likelihood of situations like third-party breaches from occurring. That's that most impactful amplifier. We're looking at breach cost. Next slide. So an incident response team, this is one of the most impactful ways that you can help mitigate the cost of a breach. So this is really comprised of a group of individuals across the organization that are tasked with managing a data breach incident throughout the life cycle. This organization may not be directly responsible for tasks such as containment of the breach. Really overall, they oversee the breach-related activities and are ultimately responsible for communication to the rest of the organization and externally. Really the primary objective of this team is to reduce the breach lifecycle time. Key members of this team include an executive level sponsor. That person will handle funding, staff, incident response plan execution. There's a technical lead that's part of that to handle all technical interactions with internal resources, hired consultants or firms, or any government involved entities, which that's actually fairly common for the government to get involved with larger breaches. A marketing resource for PR related communications, and then finally an HR person. It may be less obvious that HR person is actually responsible for situations where there may be an internal employee that is involved with an incident. Next slide. And continuing on with the incident response. is really the plan. So the plan is meant to be a holistic program. It covers multiple risk scenarios. An incident response plan is really informed from a security risk assessment. So a risk assessment identifies all the areas of impact to the business and the potential impact levels. So given the probability of an attack, risk strategies are applied by category. And the categories are, do I avoid the risk? Do I mitigate the risk, share the risk, or accept the remaining risk? Ultimately, if you choose to avoid the risk, because some risk is accepted, then when an unlikely incident occurs, the incident response plan is that line of defense for that risk that you choose to take. The incident response plan should start with really the most critical systems for the organization. Let's say, for example, you're a service provider. That could include your clients as a critical point of needing to recover. The incident classification framework is a tool that helps you enable kind of proper prioritization if you're looking at what's the most critical versus least. And we don't have enough time to go through what that framework is, but certainly outside consultants can help out with things like a framework, a risk assessment, some of the other concepts that we're discussing. It's really the best way to accelerate if you don't have those things in place. At the end of the day, a plan should be really clear, simple, and in an accessible location so organizations can quickly determine the system and the data that's under attack to take the appropriate action to protect the critical assets and sensitive data. In preparation for common breach scenarios, written statements can be prepared, typically by that marketing person, and that's done ahead of time just to save time in the event that there is a breach. You don't have to go through and write all of those things out. This is for the more common breach scenarios. Again, that's communication internally with clients and to the public. Tabletop exercises are really essential for an incident response team. Closes gaps in the IR plan that maybe were not thought of ahead of time that get exposed during the tabletop exercise. It helps to minimize the human error during an actual breach by getting people more comfortable with kind of the motions that you go through. You also reduce the breach lifecycle time. Again, that's really the key of the IR team. Tabletop exercises should be done on an annual basis, really, for effectiveness. And just finally, to wrap up this portion, when an organization implements both the IR team and an IR plan that was tested via that regular tabletop exercise, they were seeing on average breach cost reduction of $1.23 million versus organizations that had neither an IR team or an IR plan. So a very impactful thing to have in place. Carrie, next slide, please. As I mentioned previously, the security risk assessment helps with identifying those risks and probabilities. They expose the gaps in achieving compliance with frameworks like HIPAA and SOC 2. SRA tools are available. They provide regular assessments that you can run against your organization. They also provide guidance without involving outside parties. These SRA tools are, there's a lot of them that are out there, and a rule of thumb is you get what you pay for. So try and not go on the cheaper end there. It'll be more effective if you get a tool probably that's a little bit more on the expensive side. MFA solutions, talking about multi-factor authentication, probably the most effective combatant against data breaches. They're becoming increasingly important, obviously with the global workforce, all working at home, potentially in untrusted networks. In many cases, they're using non-corporate issued devices. It's an effective way of authenticating access by using more than one piece of evidence. That's really what that multi-factor comes into play. The factors are something they know, something they have, or something they are. Something they are refers to something like biometrics, thumbprint. Can protect against many breach scenarios. For example, an inadvertent insider that's compromised by phishing or spear phishing. Data backup and continuity solutions should be a part of really any standard infrastructure build for protection against a myriad of issues, well beyond data breaches, obviously. But increasingly, attackers are including backup solutions as targets, specifically like ransomware attacks. So for this reason, it's recommended to include, be sure that you're finding a solution that has ransomware safeguards as a feature. For example, Veeam has protections now in their tool set that allow for recovery of backup images up to 2 weeks after those images are deleted, even by a system administrator. So it's kind of like a recycle bin aspect. You can go back and recover that data. AI security, machine learning, analytics, lots of technologies out there provide significant benefit to the organization, especially ones that have experienced a breach. What the purpose of that is to automate the incident response orchestration. So I am going out and I'm finding where that breach happened and plugging the hole very quickly. So we're reducing that breach lifecycle time. Companies that use these type of technologies versus ones that did not, they saw their cost of a breach cut in nearly half if they had the full security automation in place. An example of what a tool like this might be is Varonis. Varonis is a security tool, actively monitors the metadata within an infrastructure to detect just patterns within the infrastructure, within the data. So for example, if I have a ransomware attack that's encrypting large portions of my data, it's going to be able to detect that and alert you. So it can help find where that breach may happen. Like MFA, extensive use of data encryption is really an effective measure to reduce the cost of data breaches. Encryption ranks second amongst the cost mitigation scale. If you go back and look at that chart from earlier, protect against theft, compromised networks, a lot of other scenarios. VPNs are also a useful tool that kind of coincide with encryption across untrusted networks. Next slide, please. With human error being the cause of over a fourth of all data breaches, staff training should be absolutely a top priority. Every level of the organization is impacted by human error data breaches. Email phishing is a technique that's used really against like the common employee. Targeted spear phishing is aimed more at executives. It uses social media engineering and things to gain access to like more sensitive information, because I'm working with a person that is at a higher level than the organization has more access. When you're training staff, we should be tracking before and afters. What happens before the training? What does it look like afterwards? Keep track of their progress. And we should be tracking folks on their ability to understand across different categories of data breaches. So we're looking at something like ransomware versus other aspects like physical security. And then we should be retraining in the areas that they're lacking. So consistently measuring. This should also be done randomly. Like when the typical scenario is I'm training my people once a year. This should be an ongoing process, especially because threats are always being enhanced. They're always being changed. They're finding new techniques. So we should be continually doing training. A back channel should be open for these employees. They can send potential threats to, and then you have trained staff that can verify legitimacy. And, we shouldn't be penalizing these people when mistakes are happening. We're all learning. There's different things. We can't be experts on everything. So finally, let's make that whole experience fun the best way that we can. It's not a fun topic to go through or exercise to go through, but, try and make it the most fun that we possibly can. The right side shows just the impact of what human error can cause. You think of the most secure facilities. This is a gas pipeline that was shut down because someone clicked a link in an email, and critical infrastructure that could be impacted by cyber criminals. So everyone's really a target here, and training is definitely something that people should take seriously. Next slide, please. Okay, cyber liability insurance. Like I said, the first payment made to the mortgage, second to the insurance. Now we're talking about preserving the business in the event that you are breached. As you saw earlier, the number of data breaches is increasing dramatically, and you should be operating with the mentality that it's not just a matter of if you'll be breached, but when. Buy insurance, buy what you can afford. Really do not go cheap here. I think it's really important to understand the coverage that you're buying. The policy should be reviewed by somebody that understands your business. It's an unfortunate truth that many insurance brokers are not educated in the day-to-day operations of their clients. Don't expect that the typical broker is going to be able to guide you through to get the proper insurance. For example, does the policy cover independent contractors? Do you rely on independent contractors? So that's something that you should be, wary of. If we're looking at the cost of a breach, understanding how much coverage that you should have, that's a really tough calculation, but know that it's calculated by the number of exposed records and then the cost for each record. So this is typically a force multiplier situation. For example, if you conduct business with a hospital system, depending on the nature of your business, you could be liable for not just their employees' records that were compromised, but could also be all of their patient records. Just a quick factoid, in 2016, there was an average of at least one healthcare data breach per day, resulting in a total of 27 million affected records for that year. Are there record limitations in your cyber liability coverage? For example, do you have only 100,000, a couple 100,000? That's something that you should inspect and make sure that there is not a limit or that you understand what that limit is. You should also request this type of information from your vendors, people that you do business with, people that support you on the back end. Get copies of their cyber liability coverage, understand how you are protected when you form a relationship with them. If you recall, third-party breaches was the #1 data breach cost amplifier. So very, very important to inspect that when you're looking at forming new relationships or even just evaluating existing relationships. At the end of the day, the quickest way to understand and negotiate policies, speak to a specialist, someone that's knowledgeable in this type of insurance. Don't continue to beat up on brokers. Most brokers are very bad at this in general. An attorney will be best suited. Get one that understands data privacy and security and represents tech companies if you are a tech company. Next slide. Vendor assessments. This kind of dovetails onto what I was just talking about. Vendor assessments are really a way of protecting your business. It's a way of just assessing who you're doing business with. Again, when you're forming new business partnerships or negotiating contract renewals with existing vendors, each new relationship you form should really be considered a new exposure point. Vendors should be required to provide proofs of claims that they make. So if someone's saying that they are HIPAA compliant, I'm going to see proof of that. BAAs is something that you should request. Cyber liability coverage, as I mentioned, risk analysis that are performed by third parties. For example, it's really common for infrastructure providers to mislead their clients by stating, "Oh, my cloud supports HIPAA compliance." Does that mean if you move into their environment, into the cloud, that you're now HIPAA compliant? Very commonly is not the case. How much of that compliance responsibility falls on you before you're actually compliant is something that you should focus and make sure that you understand. Contract language should be inspected for data breach specific language. For example, can you terminate a contract with the vendor or a partner in the event of a breach? What indemnification exists specifically for security related incidents? Ensure that that coverage does not only apply to publicly reported breaches. Not everything has to be publicly disclosed. and what is their damages cap. All important considerations when choosing vendors to do business with. Next slide. Now I want to go into more kind of timely news. And we're talking about coronavirus, the number of jobs that could be impacted, the cost to the world economy. I think that everybody's really, really cautious about what can happen with their job, with their business, with businesses that you're supporting. I think that, that there's a lot of unknowns that are happening, and businesses need to be prepared for that. So actually, let's move to the next slide real quickly. Preparing for a remote workforce. I think this is an absolute top of mind. If you haven't gotten a dozen emails or more about this, I would be shocked. Really, I think everybody's looking for ways to figure out, how do I work with a bunch of work from home folks? I live in Colorado. Colorado just instituted a policy where people can only leave their homes for, the absolute bare necessities or emergencies. So how, as a business, do you continue your business operations in the event that, I had this remote workforce situation? The first thing I think that you need to be cognizant of is escalation points. How do I notify employees? How do I notify clients of anything that's going to impact them? How do I notify them of changes? How do they notify me of changes that are happening on their end? You should really have a written remote work policy, something that explains this is how you work from home. If they're involved in HIPAA-related work and they're looking at records that are sensitive, there's different precautions that need to be taken into place when you're doing that from home. For example, you may need to have a lock on the door in the office that you're working in that locks the room when you leave. Security and remote access tools, we've touched on this already. Just standard security tools become vitally important in a remote workforce situation. I want to have multi-factor authentication. I want to have VPN. Just these basic technologies that provide people access to work, but still gives the business the assurance that I am working from a trusted device, or I am actually who I say that I am, and you don't have to worry about what I'm accessing. Human resources personnel, very critical. I need to make sure that if people get sick, people have access to the right support, even though they are working from home. That access to human resources is very vital. There's just a human element to all of this that we need to be cognizant of and make sure that people are taken care of. A disaster recovery plan becomes really critical in these types of situations. What happens if my primary site is unavailable? I don't have people there to actually physically do anything from a failover perspective, or I need to fail over to a site that is unmanned. Make sure that tests are validated, they're up to date. As soon as changes are made within the infrastructure, that disaster recovery plan becomes obsolete. Keeping that thing up to date is really critical, especially now, when we don't really know what the dynamic of just the world around us is. It could be anything from power related, who kind of knows what could happen. It could be network, right? There's a lot of strains that are happening on the network today with different usage. That kind of goes to the next bullet point. Make sure that there's adequate infrastructure to support the demand. I have a lot of people working from home, maybe a lot of people that are streaming video. All the kids are home for the next couple of weeks, and it's going to find new pressure points within the infrastructure, and I may need to flex up particular pieces of that infrastructure in order to support the change. And then finally, contingency plans. God forbid something happens to staff, could be partially, a key resource. It could be I need to let people go because my financial situation is getting, strained. So, how do I continue to maintain operations with a limited staff or without a key person that may have particular skill set? How are you going to augment those gaps? Next slide. OTAVA wants to be there for our clients, for others out there that may be struggling with some of these challenges. We really broke the needs down to 3 categories and just built on top of what I was just talking about. How do we continue having accessibility into my infrastructure? How do I continue to secure that infrastructure? And then what is my continuity plan? How do I stay ready in the event that something happens in my infrastructure? We're describing in this document that you see off on the right that I have a screenshot of, and there's a link there that'll be distributed out after this call to this document that explains particular challenges that may be happening. I'm just going to pick on bandwidth, for example. I already touched on that. I think that that's something that's very obvious, could change with the event of, a bunch of work from home folks. How does OTAVA help fill that gap? How can we support you? How can we support you from maintaining security within the infrastructure? If you need to burst out and have additional resources in the cloud because I have increased demand, maybe I'm one of those, the fortunate industries that's seeing a whole bunch of demand. I want to be able to support that. Maybe I need to burst out and have cloud resources in addition to what I have maybe on my prem or in another cloud. These are all ways that, we're trying to meet our clients halfway and say, hey, we have solutions that could help. Just remember that we're here in the event that you do need help. Next slide. Speaking to meeting our clients and our prospects halfway, really what we're doing is a limited time solution offer. This is something where, those key components that our clients could be struggling with, we want to provide them, the ability to leverage these tools to keep their business running, keep it secure, keep it backed up, have that peace of mind. So we're offering 60 days free on particular services, and then 20% off those services through the remainder of the year. I think that, there's an uncertainty of how long this could be impacting not only kind of from the work from home scenario, but also the economy. So OTAVA is really stepping up here and trying to make sure that, clients know that we're here to support them. Separately on that, at the bottom, you'll see we have an ongoing offer. This is 1 month free of disaster recovery as a service on a 12-month contract. And, there's some contact information at the bottom for someone to reach out to if there is something that you need, either the 877 number or email solutions at otava.com. And with that, that's what I had prepared for today. Carrie, back to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Jason. I think that was a really good presentation. And again, just reiterating what you said earlier, with things being what they are, we definitely want to be here to help you. If there's anything that we can do, or if you have further questions, we have a lot of people here that are ready, willing, and able, and our staff is working as hard as they can to keep businesses that provide that critical infrastructure up and running. So just know that we are here to help. With that being said, I think we will wrap things up here. Please know that this presentation will be sent out to everyone afterwards. The recording and slides will be included. So keep an eye on your inbox in the next 24 hours for those slides and the recording. In the meantime, if you're interested in learning more, or if you need further assistance, we are happy to help. We realize these are times where we all have to work together. And again, we just want you to know that we're here to help you however we can. Finally, one last note, please note that we are going to be hosting another webinar on April 28th at 2 p.m. with Brandon McCoy of Veeam Software. We're going to be discussing ransomware protection, so be sure to mark your calendars and stay tuned for more details coming soon. With that, have a great day, everybody. Stay healthy and stay safe. Thank you.